I'm a king who locked his wife in a tower. If it sounds like a fairy tale, think again. His wife spent 20 harrowing years there, and there were no animated talking animals or long locks of hair to get her out. Philip was as tough as nails, but he had a reason for keeping away from his wives, a dark secret that he would take to his grave. Philip was born in Gonesse on August 21, 1165, to King Louis VII and his third wife, Adela of Champagne. After having 4 children with 2 different wives, Philip was the king's first son. Louis was already 45 when Philip was born and in ill health, so he was in a hurry to have his son declared his co-ruler. On November 31, 1179, when he was 14, Archbishop William of the White Hands anointed Philip the King of France in an elaborate ceremony. Louis was quickly trying to tie up loose ends before the end of his life, so he came up with someone that could marry his son. Her name was Isabella of Hainaut, and on her wedding day she was 10 years old and her groom was 14. This was a marriage of advantage, and it was a big one. Isabella's parents were a count and a countess, so they were legitimately royal. Isabella also brought with her a pretty big dowry, the county of Artois. This large chunk of land would serve France well, but even with that amazing dowry, not everybody was happy with this marriage, namely Philip's mother. Believe it or not, Isabella, as young as she was, had another man she was supposed to marry. When she was just 1 year old, her father promised her to Henry, who was not only the Count of Champagne, but also Isabella's nephew. Isabella was not happy that her nephew lost his betrothed, but Isabella wasn't happy about a lot of things. She also wasn't happy about Philip being king at all. She and Philip's 4 uncles all thought that it wasn't a good idea for the ailing Louis to hand the throne over to Philip, as he was still so young. Well, less than a year after Philip became king, Louis was dead, and now Philip was able to implement some of his own ideas. For instance, his father had been quite friendly with Jews and even protected them. Philip didn't have those same sympathies. Soon after becoming king, he took away all of the Jews' property. He then made them convert to Christianity, and years later he went even further. In 1182, he expelled all the Jews from any land the royal family held. He also wanted to build a market in Paris, and to do that, he tore down houses, all of them owned by Jews. And this wasn't nearly the worst part of Philip's persecution. That goes to the burning of nearly 100 Jews in Brie-Comte-Robert. In spite of Adela's complaints, Isabella became queen on May 28, 1180, just a month after getting married to Philip. By the time she was 14, Philip was less than thrilled with her because she hadn't produced a son yet. Being 14 was a little different back then than it is now. There was, however, another reason for Philip to be angry with his wife. At this time, he was also fighting a battle against Flanders. In the midst of the conflict, he saw something that turned his stomach. Isabella's father was supporting Flanders. How could he have a wife whose father was for the other team? That was it for Philip. In his eyes, his wife was a dud, and he had to get rid of her. Isabella found out that her husband wanted her out, and she realized that only something drastic would keep her married to Philip and, more importantly, the Queen of France. So she came up with a plan. She stripped off her shoes and put on the clothes of a penitent, that's someone who's very sorry, and walked into the church. What she was trying to do was get sympathy from the people. She thought they'd see her in bare feet and rags and let her keep her position as queen. But were the people so easily manipulated? The answer is yes. A large group went to the palace and began to yell. They wanted to let the king know that he couldn't just toss Isabella aside. Inside the palace was Philip's uncle Robert, one of the people who was against the marriage in the first place. He heard the angry mob and he hatched a plan of his own. Robert knew he couldn't win against a crowd so strong and passionate, so he decided to stop Philip from ditching his bride. But Robert had an ulterior motive. He knew that losing Isabella also meant losing the county of Artois. Isabella was here to stay, for now at least. Her plan had worked, but if she wanted to stick around, she needed to produce a male heir. In 1187, when she was 17 years old, Isabella finally gave birth to a son, Louis, named after his grandfather. This would finally cement her position as the Queen of France. In 1190, Isabella gave birth again, this time to twin boys. The first child died on the same day he was born. The next day, Isabella died due to complications from the pregnancy. 2 days after that, the other newborn died too. While all this tragedy was taking place, Philip was in Normandy, battling it out with Richard I of England. The news of his wife's and twin boys' deaths led him to do something strange. He signed a quick truce and sped back to Paris. Once there, he checked that they had buried Isabella properly, mourned for about a week, and then immediately went back to Normandy. 3 years later, Philip was in search of a second wife. It's not exactly clear what his motives were for getting married this time. His bride was Ingeborg, whose father was the King of Denmark. Maybe it was the dowry, a very significant 10,000 marks. It was a good sum, but was it worth getting married for? Judging by his behavior at the wedding, it seemed that Philip wasn't sure why he got married either. At a dinner after the wedding, Philip wasn't looking well. He was visibly pale and seemed like he couldn't wait for the ceremony to be over. Once the formalities ended, he sprang into action. He sent his new bride to a convent and went straight to the Pope. What he wanted was an end to his new marriage, which was only a few hours old. Of course, Pope Celestine III was dumbstruck. When he asked Philip why, the new groom said it was because he and his wife hadn't consummated the marriage. Obviously, Philip wanted out, but his reason made no sense. Ingeborg, not prepared to simply walk away, insisted that she and the king had consummated the marriage. In the end, the Pope decided that Philip couldn't marry anyone else because he already had a perfectly good wife. The Pope's decision was clear, but would Philip abide by it? He had already found a new bride, 13-year-old Margaret, and she was en route from Geneva. Her father, William I of Geneva, had approved of the match and was taking his daughter to Paris himself. On the way there, however, the entourage came under attack from Thomas, Count of Savoy. When Thomas took one look at young Margaret, he decided he wanted her for himself. He forcibly removed her from her father, and off they went into the sunset. Poor Margaret was pretty much Thomas's prisoner, but soon he fell in love with the girl he'd taken by force. They eventually tied the knot, had 14 kids, and lived happily ever after. They were very different times. Meanwhile, Philip had Ingeborg imprisoned. 3 years after their bizarre marriage, he had found another bride, and in June 1196, he married Agnes of Morania. Of course, according to the Pope, this meant that Philip had 2 wives, which was not cool. When the Pope got wind of Philip's marriage to Agnes, he condemned it. Philip didn't care. He continued to live with Agnes as husband and wife. When in 1199, the Pope found out that Philip was defying him, he put all of France under an interdict. This meant that France was now outside of the world that the Pope had jurisdiction over. This was pretty serious business if your country was Catholic. Ingeborg sent letters to Philip saying that the conditions she lived under were harsh. Her captors in the castle were mistreating her, and she was considering ending her life. Instead of showing his wife compassion, he just had her moved to a tower where she wasn't given enough food to eat, and he wasn't allowed to have any visitors. With his bride safely locked away, Philip and Agnes had 2 children, and this made the Pope even angrier. After all, these children were illegitimate. The Pope then went a step further. He kicked Philip out of the church. This troubled the king, and he promised that he would separate from Agnes. During this separation, Agnes somehow became pregnant with their 3rd child. Fortunately, this time she died during the birth. Philip wanted the Pope to declare his children with Agnes as legitimate, and in 1201 the Pope agreed, knowing that it would be good for him politically. Philip was now down to just one wife, but he still didn't really want her. He again asked the Pope for an annulment of his marriage to Ingeborg. This time, the excuse he gave the Pope was that he needed an annulment because of witchcraft. He said that Ingeborg had used witchcraft, which made it impossible for the two to have marital relations. Even the Pope, who seemed to have Philip's back at this point, couldn't get on board with this narrative. Philip was stuck with a wife he had no interest in. He did, however, have an interest in the throne of the Kingdom of England. He realized that the weight of this throne would be easier because of Ingeborg's ties to the Danish throne. While the Vatican had sometimes supported Philip and other times not, it was now time for the Pope to need a favor from Philip. There was a group of people in Languedoc who were living a life that went against everything the Catholic Church preached. The Pope asked Philip to help him straighten them out, with whatever force was necessary. Philip seemed to hold a grudge and only remembered the times when the Vatican opposed him, and so he gave the Pope the same treatment. For all his petulance, bigotry, and psychopathic tendencies, Philip did actually leave an indelible legacy on the nation of France. He had workers pave the streets of Paris. He also built the marketplace, Les Halles. While Notre Dame Cathedral was already under construction when Philip became king, he did make sure that it was completed. He also oversaw the construction of the Louvre. Of course, back then it wasn't an art gallery, but a fortress. All this construction was a huge boon for Paris and remains a draw for tourists today. The University of Paris received a charter from Philip, and Paris became known as the first city of teachers. People compared it to Athens as far as being a great world civilization. He also helped the grape-crushing industry by creating the Battle of the Wines, a competition that helped make France a leader in all things red, white, and rosé. Probably the biggest change Philip made, however, was how France looked on a map. Before his reign, France was a third of the size it was afterwards. Through his sheer will and hard work, he took the land north of Loire that had long belonged to the English. This was a vital move as it got France to the sea in the north. No one ever figured out why Philip turned his back so strongly against some of his wives. In his 1966 stage play, The Lion and Winter, playwright James Goldman shed some light as to why. The play suggests that maybe Philip didn't like women at all. In the play, Philip and Richard the Lionheart are in fact lovers. But is there any truth to this theory? There is something in the records that has given some historians pause. Apparently, the two kings spent at least one night together in the same bed. On the other hand, some call the incident more of a stunt in order to unify France and England, and have even compared it to a photo op. In September 1222, Philip became ill. Thinking it was the end, he wrote out his will. His sickness continued through to the next year, and his fever got worse in the summer's intense heat. When he started to feel a little better, he decided to take a trip to Paris. He died during the journey at the age of 58. Before he died, Philip had a chance to speak to his son and the future king Louis VIII. He told his son to treat Ingeborg well. Because of this parting message, Ingeborg could at least enjoy her remaining years. She'd been captive for 20 years, and she now lived as the legitimate Queen of France. Thanks for watching History Exposed. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to Keep Exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factornate, for more incredible facts about everything.